Hey everyone, welcome to this week's edition of Writer's Chat, where we talk about all things writing. My name is Johnny Alexander. I'm an inspirational novelist. My co-host is Bethany Jett. Bethany is a nonfiction writer and collaborative writer. And our special guest today, telling the secrets of writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul, is Tracy Crump. You will want to visit Tracy's website. I was there this morning. It's absolutely beautiful, tracycrump.com. We'll put that in the chat. Tracy and her family live in North Mississippi. She says it's the best of both worlds because they have this wildlife all around them and lakes and within walking distance. Actually, I've been to one of those lakes. It is beautiful because Tracy, Bethany, and I and the kids had a picnic this summer.
That's right.
We're up there, and that was a lot of fun. But they're really close to Memphis, too, so that's cool. Tracy has 2 sons, 2 daughters-in-law, her husband, Stan, a beautiful, and she says perfect granddaughter, and also a brand new little grandson.
That's right.
Yes. Love seeing those pictures. Tracy's a nurse who didn't plan to be a writer, but she got the bug and has been very successful, especially when it comes to writing Chicken Soup for the Soul stories. As you probably know, that's a very competitive market, and yet Tracy has managed to be published with 18 unique stories. And she shared some good news with us before we started the recording, and I'll let her share that too. But one more thing before I turn it over to Tracy, I'm going to show you 2 of the books she's in that I have. Chicken Soup for the Soul, Inspiration for the Young at Heart, and The Joy of Christmas. And I know there's tons of others. And Bethany has also been published in a Chicken Soup story. So you want to talk about just real brief, real quick, and then we'll turn it over to Tracy.
It was kind of fun. I don't know how I got on there. They send an email list out if you've written for them before, like call outs and things. Hey! And I don't know, I had just written the Cinderella Rules, and it was a dating book. So when I saw there that they were looking for the new book, which was the dating guide, and this came out in 2013, I thought of a story that I hadn't put in my book and sort of thought back to how Chicken Soup for the stories kind of go in terms of writing, and just then a couple hours submitted it, and it just watched the process go through as they, narrow and narrow and narrow, and it got in. And I don't know, I was really, really excited about it. So I'm excited to learn more because I want to write more for them. And so I'm excited to get some more insider tips to hopefully do this again. And I'm excited for everybody to get published. It's great to have on your list of where to be published. Yeah. They're so known and so respected.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, Tracy has been a guest before with us on Writer's Chat, and we're really glad to have her back again.
Thank you.
About Chicken Soup. So, Tracy, give us some of your inside scoop.
Okay. Well, Bethany mentioned before a formula. If there were a formula, I'd probably have more than 18 stories published with Chicken Soup. But there are things that you need to keep in mind if you're going to write for them. And one is that they don't want your whole life story. And I think a lot of times that's a mistake that people make, is they have to narrow it down, hone in on, I would say, one incident. Usually, it's a lot like a memoir, but you have to, in a memoir, they narrow usually on one period in the writer's or the subject's life. But in a Chicken Soup story, you have to narrow it even further. You have only 1,200 words. 1,200 words or fewer. That's the word limit. And so you can't tell a whole lot, and you can't add a whole lot of details. And I even say if you can narrow it down even further to maybe 800 or 900 words, you may have a better chance. Because, today we live in a soundbite generation. Everybody wants a quick read, and they're ready to move on to something else. And I think that's part of the allure of Chicken Soup for the Soul books, is because you can read a whole story quickly. They're great for doctor's visits, sitting in the doctor's office, you can read it, or waiting in the car line to pick up your children. So, you have to narrow down to the heart of the story. You also need to be sure you stick to the theme of the book. And that, Chicken Soup has put out probably at least 300 books now. Their website still says 250, but that was about 8 or 10 years ago.
Wow.
And they haven't updated it since. So I know they have at least 300 different titles. And it would seem like a no-brainer. Yeah, I'm going to stick to the theme of the book. But, we're writers and we can just get off track and run down those rabbit trails so fast and not even realize it. And that's one thing I have noticed in other people's stories, that I have read a lot of people a lot of times send me stories and ask me to look over them. And so that's one thing that I will often suggest. I'll say, you need to cut this out. It doesn't have anything to do with the theme of the book. It's great stuff, interesting, but you need to stick to the theme of the book.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I notice is a takeaway. Chicken soup stories can be sad or funny or touching, but they still have to make a point. If they don't have some kind of takeaway, and that is what does the reader take away with him or her that maybe changes his outlook on life or gives him a new perspective on an issue, or maybe even increases his faith. And that's what Chicken Soup wants to see in their stories. If it doesn't make a point, it's not a Chicken Soup story. I know one time I was conducting a workshop on writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul, and one lady said, we were talking about different possibilities for stories, and one attendee said, well, I want to write about my brother. She said he died, and I was very sad. And so I kind of waited for the rest of the story, and there was no more story. She said he died and she was sad. And I said, well, we can, I know we can all relate to losing someone and the feelings that you have, but I said, a Chicken Soup story has to be more than that. It's what did you learn through your sadness? How did he face his death maybe, or a number of other ways you could go, but it's got to make a point. It's got to have a takeaway. And I think that's where a lot of people, I notice, do not complete their story. They've got to have that by the end of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So those are several things that to keep in mind, and where I think a lot of people kind of stray, and the reason that they don't make it into Chicken Soup for the Soul.
The takeaway thing, I think, is the hardest part.
It is for me.
Oh, is it? Well,
it is.
encouraging.
Yeah, in my workshops, and then in the course that we've done, I talk about beginnings, middles, and ends, and I say in there the ends are the hardest for me, because you've got to, like my friend says, you've got to wrap it up with a bow. Your story is your gift to the reader, so wrap it up with a bow. And so you've got to do that. You've got to make sure you've got a takeaway. You've got to make sure you've answered any questions you've raised in the story. You have to resolve any conflicts. And you have to do all that by the end of the story, a 1,200 word or fewer story.
Yeah.
So that's not easy to do.
Mm-hmm. Like right now, I know there's a call out. I saw it on your website, and we should, not your website, your newsletter that you send out, and we want to make sure we put that info in the chat too. There's a call out right now for advice. Like, what kind of advice have you gotten that has made a difference in your life? And so I've been trying to ponder that and think about that. And I come up with these things that my mom told me, that there's no takeaway.
Yeah, that's the trouble.
It's a very wise thing. So how do you have ideas or tips of how do you pull in the takeaway? How do you decide?
Yeah.
Do you have any?
That's the tough part. And some stories are just not going to be Chicken Soup stories.
No.
And some stories are just going to, or story ideas, that's part of brainstorming, is you're not going to use everything you come up with.
Right.
And so you're going to have to discard some of those. But there are a lot of ways. There was one story I had submitted to several dog books. Excuse me. They do one about every other year for dogs, and then one for cats. And I think I submitted it 4 different times before it was finally accepted. And it was just one of those stories, how you just know this is good. This not to be proud or anything, but this is good. And it was cute. It was funny. But it didn't have a real great takeaway. And so I kept tweaking it every time. I didn't just keep submitting the same story. I tweaked it a little bit every time and slanted it. Even the dog stories, even though they are dog books, even though they do one over and over, they each have a little bit of a different slant. Okay. So I kept tweaking it to that slant. And finally, I came up with something that kind of was a universal theme and included that. And that's when it got published. So I think that may have been what put it over the top. But because a lot of times, not that this was a mediocre story, but you can sometimes salvage a mediocre story by giving it a killer takeaway. You really can, because that is so important to them. These are inspirational stories, as I know you know, and they're true stories. But they want the reader to feel more hopeful. Hope is a big theme in their stories. They want the reader to feel more hopeful, better about life, more joyful. And if you can do that with your takeaway, then you've got a good chance of getting published.
Wow. Even a sad story, then it still needs to have that.
Yes. In fact, yes, you brought that up. And you asked me earlier before we started what book I was published in first, and it was the Chicken Soup for the Nurse's Soul. It was the second one they did. I think they've done 4 of those now. And most of the stories in that book were tearjerkers. Most of the stories, the patient died. But they still had a redeeming quality. They still had an element of hope. And, it was either how the patient faced his death or what the nurse learned through caring for that patient. And so they still had that redeeming quality and that takeaway.
I was going to ask you about, I'm glad you brought it up. The first book was the nurse's book. When was that?
I think it came out in 2007. So that was about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And by the way, do y'all know that next year is the 25th anniversary for Chicken Soup for the Soul?
Is it really?
Their first book came out in 1993.
Wow.
And that's kind of an interesting story if you want to hear about that.
Go ahead and tell
well, this is actually more about how they came up with the name too. It was started. The idea originated in the early 1990s with 2 motivational speakers, Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen. And they had been using true inspirational stories in their talks, and the audiences just ate it up. And so people began encouraging them to write those stories down so everybody could share in them. And they thought that was a pretty good idea, and they came up with 101 stories. They decided that was the perfect number. I don't know how they hit on that, but anyway. And in the meantime, they said, well, we've got to have just a really great title for this book. And that's when Jack Canfield remembered his grandmother's chicken soup and how she said it would cure anything. And he said what her soup could do for the body, he wanted this book to do for the soul. So that's how they came up with Chicken Soup for the Soul.
It's a great name.
Yeah, really different.
And there's well, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, of course, they never imagined that it would go where it went, that sell multi-millions and have now 300 different titles and be the best-selling trade paperback series in publishing history.
Yeah. And there have been knockoffs of it. I mean, not, other, I shouldn't have said knockoffs.
Well, they are kind of the standard. That's true.
Yeah.
I've even seen guidelines for other anthologies that were word for word the same as the Chicken Soup guidelines.
Oh, wow.
Wow. So they're kind of the standard bearer right there.
And not to get into marketing, and I don't remember enough of the story to tell it all, but I have read about how they were just crazy and obsessed almost with getting this book out. Like they had a goal. We're going to sell at least 1 book every day or something, and they would go and talk to different groups of people and get it into like hotels and just they really worked it. And
they did. And this might be an encouragement to people who are trying to get a book published. They were rejected by 144 publishers before they finally found a small press. It was just a small publisher, Health Communications Incorporated. Doesn't even sound like anything that would publish this book, and that took a chance on them. And of course, they just went. And at first, they just had modest sales. It came out in June of 1993, but then by Christmas, people who had bought 1 book bought 5 more, and it just went wild. And so they were even in the Guinness Book of World Records for having, having the most books on the New York Times bestselling list at the same time. And it just went wild.
Well, and what I think one of the appeals too is that now that they've got all these different series, it's like you don't have to read every single Chicken Soup book. You find, but there's just so many, like, the nurses one. I'm sure, that a lot of nurses read that and were just comforted by what they were reading. And like I got the one that you're in about the young at heart, and it's nice to kind of be at that age, and so or the dogs or the holidays.
Oh yeah, things that appeal to you. They have something for everybody. They even have a NASCAR book, and I'm not a NASCAR fan, but there are a lot of them out there. So
and they make good gifts then, because you can really target the person.
That's right.
What else do we want to talk about?
Well, one thing about chicken soup too that a lot of people need to understand is that it's all about story.
Yes.
It's not, it's not a magazine article, and you have to be careful too. And this is one thing a lot of people are mistaken about. A lot of people think that Chicken Soup for the Soul is a Christian series, but it's not. It's a general market series. But they allow you to talk about God or your faith in any of their books, even if it's not overtly Christian title. And that's kind of a nice opportunity for Christians who want to write for the general market. But it's all about story, and story is so powerful. Stories have been used for generations to pass information from one generation to the next. Okay. And my little granddaughter asks me all the time, tell me stories about Daddy when he was a little boy. And so stories are powerful. We love stories. And I think the greatest storyteller of all was Jesus. Absolutely. He used stories in his ministry all the time. We call them parables. And they always imparted a truth. They had a takeaway every time.
I wonder if he had trouble coming up with it.
I doubt it.
Probably not. Gosh, my mind is just like so full of stuff, and then when I want to say something, it's gone. But I knew where I was going. Talking about the power of story and all of that, I think Chicken Soup is actually a pretty good training ground too, because it is competitive, so it is hard to, your story's up against tons of others.
Yeah.
But this whole thing about the beginning, middle, and end, and the takeaway and hope, Chicken Soup's not the only one that wants those kinds of stories. If you're writing devotionals, you still want to have that's part of writing a devotional, is having a takeaway, and that's really important. And even if you're writing a nonfiction book, as Bethany knows, you are telling your story, and there has to be the beginning, the middle, the end, and the takeaway and hope, or people are not going to want to. They're going to be discouraged. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's why Chicken Soup is a great training ground for other venues too, because for one thing, it teaches you to write tight. And if you're going to write devotionals, you really have to learn how to write tight.
Yeah.
But you can't, you don't have 60, 70,000 words like you do in a book to write your story. You've got to hone it down. And also you're going to use, even in a nonfiction story, you're going to use fiction techniques to bring your story to life. And so that's another great way to learn how to do that, because if not, you're going to have a dry story, and you're going to have, or a dry book if you're writing a book, a nonfiction book. You don't want just a recitation of facts. It's not a newspaper article. So you want to learn to use those fiction techniques, and that's a great way to do it. And plus, I just think writing something short, sometimes everybody thinks they have to start out with a book. I'm not a writer unless I write a book. Well, I have never written a book, or never published a book. I won't say I haven't written a book. I haven't published one, but I've published lots of magazine articles and devotionals and stories. And it's good to me, because then I can finish something and move on to something else. I like to do that. And it's also a boost to your ego, I guess I'd say, but it makes you want to continue on just submitting something, even if it's not published. I got something completed and I submitted it, and I think that makes you feel good. And then if it is chosen to be published, whoa, yeah, that was fun.
And I mentioned in the introduction you had good news to share, so go ahead and tell us about your two republished.
Yes, Chicken Soup have chosen now two of my stories to be republished. And what they do is, I think sometimes they come up with a new book that they don't have time to send call outs and gather the stories, because like Bethany mentioned before, it is a long process. And to hone, to narrow in on the stories they want to use. So a lot of times they'll do a book just to benefit an organization. And a couple of years ago, they came up with one to benefit the Girls and Boys Clubs of America. And they chose one of my stories to republish in that. It's about around Mother's Day. And so it was a story about my mother-in-law. So it was for moms. In fact, I think it was a story out of that Inspiration for the Young at Heart. I think that was that one. And then also, I just found out last week that they chose one of my stories to publish in a Christmas Miracles book that they're doing to benefit the Toys for Tots that the Marines do. And so that was kind of nice. It's not just Christmas stories. In fact, mine is more of like a Thanksgiving story. But they're doing it for the holidays, Thanksgiving through New Year's. So that was kind of nice. So I can say I've been published 20 times in Chicken Soup for the Soul books, but just 18 unique stories.
Just 18. Listen,
just 18.
Well, congrats on that. And really, I mean, it is. And Jerry McBride's in here too. Jerry also has been quite successful with
She's done great. I'm so proud of her. She does, and she just keeps on going.
Yeah, that's great. And so congrats to you too, Jerry. So writing, though, for Chicken Soup has kind of led you into some pretty cool opportunities, because now you do the Right Life newsletter, which includes call-outs, and you do the Chicken Soup workshop. So can you tell us a little bit about both of those projects?
Sure. We started the Right Life newsletter, I think it was in 2008. We had a little workshop at the library. We had, I think, 9 attendees. And we said, you know what, we can send you more information. So sign up for this newsletter. And they did. And we went from there. We now have almost 850 subscribers. We send, we started out just, and we, as Mary Lane Wade Koch and I, we're kind of the partners in this. And we send art. We have an article. We started out writing the articles ourselves, and then we started getting other writers. And so we've had some pretty big names to write for us. Liz Curtis Higgs is one, and we've had just several big names. Bethany Jett, I think she was one of them.
I think so.
The big names. But we have one article. It just goes out once a month. We decided at the beginning we didn't want a whole big long newsletter that was going to fill up everybody's inbox or send out multiple newsletters. So we said once a month you'll get one newsletter, and it also has a subscriber spotlight, which where we spotlight one of our subscribers. We just ask them to send us a 150-word piece telling what they're doing with their writing now.
Great idea.
Yeah, and it is encouraging to other writers to see, you know, what some of the writers are doing. And it doesn't have to be that you're doing anything big. It doesn't have to be that you publish anything, just that you're trying. And then we also have just a little short devotional piece in there. And we sometimes include things about conferences or things coming up. And we send the story call-outs that we receive from Chicken Soup for the Soul and other anthologies, a few other anthologies along with those. So that's been going on since 2008. That's almost 10 years now we've done that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the workshops kind of grew out of that. We did that little workshop at the library for a few people, and we've just kind of grown, and we're now traveling the country. We did one in Kentucky last spring, and we've got another one in Kentucky again next spring. And so we partner with people that want to bring our workshop to their church or their community center. It's a 4.5-hour workshop, and we have the best time. We do breakout sessions, and they're just a whole lot of fun. So that's really been a great thing that we've really enjoyed. So, and of course, the latest thing, do I get to tell about that? Or,
sure.
All right. The latest thing is y'all invited me to do a course for your Serious Writers Academy, and that was a growth experience for me, because I am technologically challenged, and I know Bethany knows that because she's done tutorials for me many times. But I learned a lot. I even have my own recording studio now. I didn't know if you knew that.
No.
It's otherwise known as my closet. But that was my son's suggestion when I was having trouble with the sound. He said, well, get in your closet. All those clothes will muffle the sound, and then you won't have that, that echoing kind of thing. And so now I've got my own recording studio.
That's nice.
But it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it.
And your course is on this topic as well.
It's How to Write for Chicken Soup for the Soul.
Yeah. That's so cool. And I think one of the great things about this, just listening to Tracy's story, is just, she was successful in doing something. She wanted to reach out to others. I mean, starting out with 9 people, one little workshop, and now she's got this newsletter and these workshops that she's doing all around the country. So you just never know how God's going to take something little and just the influence will spread. So I was living in Florida. I don't know how I came up with the newsletter, how it crossed into my world, but I subscribed, so I knew Tracy's name. And, it was one of those newsletters that you look forward to seeing. It's not one where you just
delete
as soon as it comes across. And I always kind of looked at. And so imagine my surprise when I moved to Memphis and I go to the first Mid-South Christian Writers Conference, and Tracy is taking registration. It's like, I know your name. I know.
That was so neat. It was fun.
So I know. So she was a celebrity to me almost.
And now look at you. A multi-published author.
Oh, well, that's sweet. But, it was, so then we weren't living that far from each other. I joined the writers group, and Tracy was so sweet, and we often went to lunch together after writers group. So we've gotten to be good friends, and I really appreciate that too. So, God just does some really fun things.
I know it. I know. Brings people together. And one thing I remember about you too is one of the first group meetings that you came to, we had a little exercise, and everybody I don't remember what the topic even was, but everybody wrote a little something, and you read yours, and we all went, and I said, that's why she now has a 3-book deal. She is a great writer.
Okay. Oh my goodness. Well, does anyone else have any questions? We want to make sure that we answer those. We do have the question about submitting, and it is on the website, but there are specific guidelines. I believe it's been a while since I've been on there. So Tracy, can you tell us any more about that process?
About submitting? Yes. The only way you can submit now is through their online form. They used to let you email or mail things, but no longer. So you have to go to chickensoup.com, and it's kind of since they revamped their website a few years ago, it's kind of hard to find, but at the top it says it's under read, which I never would have thought it would be under there. And if you go into there, you'll find submit your story. And even if you're not ready to submit your story, that's where you need to go very often, because they not only have the submission form there, but they also have their upcoming topics. And we don't get call outs for every single Chicken Soup book. So you need to go there often, see what they're planning, what you might want to write for. And then they also have another tab that for guidelines. And that's where you're going to go and find out what they'll have, what they want, what they don't want, and a few of their guidelines there. So you need to always visit. And I always reread the guidelines, no matter how many stories I have submitted. I reread because they can change.
Right.
In fact, one change that they had that was pretty significant was they used to allow you to tell the stories from first person or third person, but no longer. Now it has to be a first person telling of the story. So you can't just tell about your neighbor down the street, something that he told you happened to him. You have to kind of be part of the story. It has to be about you or someone close to you. And so that was a big change a few years ago.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was just kind of, I guess, expanding on that you could tell other people's stories, but now you can't even really do that as a pen name or anything, correct? I mean, it has to be your story.
Yes, and they used to allow you to tell what they called as told to stories, and so your name would be on there.
Yeah.
Yes, but they say they really don't want those anymore. If you do tell someone else's story, that it's going to be in their name, and their bio is going to be in the book, and they're going to get the money, and that may be fine. If that's okay with you, then that's fine. But just know that you can't do it as an as told to story. If you tell someone else's story, it's their story.
Right.
So.
And I liked what you said earlier about tweaking stories too, because I think they're very clear on their website. They were at one time. If you have submitted a story, even if another topic comes up that you think it'd be good for, they do not want you submitting that very same story again.
Well, they say you can. Yes, you can. If it's been published now in one of their books before, of course, they are not going to republish it unless it's like their idea, like the two stories they chose. But they say, yes, you can resubmit, but I'm the one that says that you need to tweak it. You know? Yes. But yes, you can resubmit stories to a different title, and it may be that it just fits that title better. But it's always good to go through. You know, we can always make improvements. We're never really finished with those stories.
No, never.
So, and it always helps to read. I carefully read the call outs, or if they don't have a call out, the blurb that they have on the website, because I want to make sure I'm sticking closely to that theme. That is so important, and a lot of people just don't realize how important that is.
Yeah, and they're only going to pick how many stories are there? Usually 100 or
101, and they get an average of 3,000 submissions per book. Some of them they get 5,000 or more submissions. So you have a lot of competition. You do. But if you just will stick to the guidelines, that will immediately put you out ahead of a lot of the people, because you wouldn't believe how many people don't stick to the guidelines.
80-20 rule may apply here as well. So that does increase your odds. So Bethany, you want to talk to us a little bit about your strategy for writing a story?
Yeah. I love strategy. So kind of when I was going to write this one, I was trying to figure out what do they all have in common? Like, where's the theme of the story going? Because I write nonfiction, and this is sort of like a fiction-y nonfiction story, because it's real life, but you have to tell the story. Kind of like what you're saying, Tracy, those fiction elements have to go in there. So I applied flash fiction principles when I was writing this story and sort of followed those guidelines. So I was an editor with Splicity Magazine for their web for a while, and I edited a lot of stories, and that really helped. And so I thought, this is the opinion of Bethany. So like, take everything with a grain of salt. But the story got published on the first try, so I mean, it's something. So
it worked.
And I'm looking at the guidelines and on the Chicken Soup site, and number 3 says the story should start in the action, and we call that a hook. Same thing. And then that was probably one of the most important things when you're reading Chicken Soup for the Soul. And in my story specifically, so I wanted to start out with one line that would hook the reader, kind of like how a suspense novel in the prologue or the first chapter, sometimes they start out with the villain or something bad is happening, and then it goes directly then into the main character for the rest of the story, and then the villain comes back. That was sort of the strategy that I used. So I said, you know, I never got into trouble until I started dating Justin. What does that mean? Like, but you know a lot about the story all of a sudden, like, okay, that's kind of interesting. And then I told a dating story, wrapped it up then at the end of the story where we got in trouble. So that was like this long middle, this little end. And then the takeaway was giving me problems too. So I was thinking I had to do like a parable, like a moral of the story is how I was thinking that. And it really wasn't one. So I started calling it the wrap up. And so when you write flash fiction, you kind of want to tie back to something that happened in the story or leave like with like a satisfying feeling. And so then the concluding paragraph was only like 3 sentences, but it wrapped up the whole thing and then alluded back to the beginning. And so that was sort of the takeaway, was this good thing that happened in the story that started out with getting in trouble. So that was sort of how I had done that. But I think specifically having a really good hook that alludes to something that's going to happen, and then finishing it off, and then having like that inspirational or that hopefulness at the very end. And if you can tie it back to something that happened, like I gave an answer to something that had been questioned in the story. And that kind of wrapped it up. So I thought that was like, if you're writing a story, that seemed to help me when I was trying to figure out exactly what needed to stay, because you have to cut so much, like you said.
And it was a cute story.
It sounds like.
I'm actually really proud of it.
And, you know, I think the Chicken Soup guidelines, I don't think they say this anymore since they revamped their website, but it used to say they wanted their stories to end in, you know, they're talking about their takeaway. They wanted to end in a result such as a lesson learned, a positive change, or a payoff. And that's part of that's the takeaway. That's what you want to make sure you have in your story, something like that. That sounds like you did it.
Thanks. And I was thinking too about how characters have to grow, which is a fiction element that I never think about when I write nonfiction, but I hear my mom say a lot that her heroine has to change when she's writing her stories. How does she change internally and externally and all these things? And so when I was thinking of a story to write for here, that's kind of how the takeaway ended too. The reader saw then there was a change here. There was a specific change. And so like that was another element that fiction that you can capture in the Chicken Soup, which I thought was cool.
That's
growth.
Right.
You got to see growth.
Yes.
We have to grow in our
That's right.
Good or bad, I guess.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah. And sometimes as important as it is, I say, to stick to the theme of the book, sometimes you can slant your story and kind of like I say, work outside the box. One of my later my most recent story was an inspiration for teachers. And the call out asked that it be by students about their teachers or by teachers about their students. And my story was neither. It was about my dad who had become pen pals with first grade class at the local school. And he was in assisted living. This was a program that the school had set up and wanted the children to kind of connect with the older people. And he didn't really want to do it. his hands were numb from peripheral neuropathy, and he could hardly sign his name. So the lady that led the activities director at the assisted living center, she wrote all the stories for him. And so anyway, they kind of developed that bond. And then in February, he went to they invited him to their Valentine party, and he didn't really want to go to that. He was just kind of, old and cranky, and he didn't want to go. But he went anyway, and it touched him so deeply that it just made an impression on everyone. And he actually passed away a month after that happened, and the kids cried. And it was just such a sweet story. But it really wasn't about teachers or about the students so much as about that bond between the children and the older people. But I still kept the teachers in there by saying, did they realize what they were doing? And then I said, this is probably the most important lesson they could have taught their kids all year long. And so that's basically how I ended it, and how I worked that takeaway in there to apply to the theme of the book.
That's so clever.
I'm getting teary-eyed.
Oh, I know. It makes me cry.
I bet it does. What a sweet story. Oh my gosh. And I used to keep a copy of one of the Chicken Soup stories in my glove box. Like, this is before I had my phone to carry around with me everywhere, right? To read.
Yes.
And I will tell you, I'd like waiting for the kids, and I would be crying. I mean, like every story,
I know.
no matter what it was about.
I know. I've been in doctor's office going, boo.
Yeah, if you may want to read it in private, I don't know.
Yeah.
You talked to just kind of slip through there that you do. You talk to people about their stories and do critique. Do you do that on a regular basis for people? Is that a service you're offering now?
I can't. Yes. It's if you want me to mention price, it's $30 to critique a Chicken Soup story, and I'm happy to do that. I have actually offered those as prizes before. I know ACFW wanted some, donations, and so that was one of the things that I offered for them. And but I enjoy reading other people's stories. It's it's part of their life that they're offering for other people to see and learn from. So I enjoy it.
So people can email you to take advantage of that. And can we put your email in the chat then too?
Sure. Or they can contact me through the website, but it's Tracy. Yeah, it's tracygeneral@gmail.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would like to say too that we're doing a giveaway, and details will be coming out soon about that. But one of the winners will receive a Chicken Soup for the Soul critique, which is really great, from Tracy, which is valuable. So valuable.
There's no guarantee it will be published, but
no guarantees. It'll all be in the fine print.
That's right.
That's the Serious Writer Academy giveaway, right?
Yes. Yep. And we'll be gearing up for that right now, and there'll be a push coming very soon.
All right.
If anyone else has any questions, let's let's get those in the chat. And Tracy, do you have any other like tips you wanted to share before we bring everybody on? We kind of covered the gamut.
Yeah.
Do you know of any, we mentioned the call out for the advice. So we know the Chicken Soup's doing that. So again, you don't want to just give a list of the great advice you've heard from your mom, I was telling Bethany, I said, I've got a blog post because I can say, words of wisdom from my mom, but I still haven't like narrowed it down to a story. You need to have where that advice was paid off, where you learned something.
Right. And probably just one piece of advice, not just overall. Right. One piece. And how did it change your life? What did you learn from it? How did you use it? Exactly. Those would be a lot of ways you could explore.
That's actually one that's maybe kind of easier because, I mean, if someone tells you to do something and you do it and it works, then you've got your whole, it's kind of laid out like
your
that.
story.
Right. Bethany, you were on the website. Can you tell us quickly any other, or Tracy, if you know any other?
Well, we've got call outs, I know, for one that they're doing love stories.
Oh.
And this is not they've done another book on that. In fact, that's kind of an interesting story. When I was talking about sticking to the theme of the book, a friend of mine, she had written a story for Chicken Soup for the New Moms, New Mothers. This was several years ago. And she asked me would I look it over. And I said, sure. She called me on the phone and asked, and I said, sure. And she said, oh, by the way, the deadline's at midnight tonight. And I said, okay. This is about 7 o'clock at night. So I didn't have time to be diplomatic. And I just slashed and burned about the first third of the story. I said, this is all good stuff. But it was about how she and her husband met and fallen in love and had nothing to do with new mothers. And I said, this just doesn't have anything it does not stick to the theme of the book. You need to delete this. So to her credit, she did. And she got it in on time and it was published.
Oh, wow.
And then about a year later, they did a story for Love Stories, Chicken Soup for the Soul Love Stories. So she rewrote what she had written, what she cut out of the first story, and submitted it, and it was published.
Oh, wow.
So that's how important it is to stick to the theme. But Love Stories is one of their books. It's they have a call out for, and then My Crazy Family, I think, is the other one, and its deadline is the end of this month. So you only have a couple of weeks for that one. But if you've got any, we all have our quirky relatives. Write about them.
You can use a pen name.
Pen name, you can. Mm-hmm. That's right.
Oh, really? They'll let you use a pseudonym for this one?
You can use it for all of them. You can use a pen name.
Can you?
Yeah. Be careful, Bethany. She may be writing about you.
Might.
Well,
I drive her crazy.
I might be writing about all of them.
That's right.
Oh my gosh! Someone up in the chat mentioned earlier about being a good publication credit, and I'm sure that that's true. I think you get $200 plus some free books.
And it's not just stories too. And a lot of people don't realize they do publish poems, and they will pay $200 for a poem. But the poem has to stick to the theme of the book. Also, it has to tell a story too. It can't just be a sweet rhyming poem, about love. It has to tell a story. Because once again, that's what Chicken Soup is for the Soul is all about. It's about
stories. I love that.
Yeah. And they do occasionally publish cartoons. As far as I know, they're still accepting. Yeah. I haven't seen a book in a while that has had any cartoons, but if you're gifted in that area, that might be something you want to try submitting.
Wow.
Oh, she got a cartoon. Yeah.
There's a couple in this one, but I don't usually see them a lot, but there were just a couple.
Oh, that's pretty cool too, then.
Like same kind of similar.
They pay $150 for cartoons.
Wow,
so that's kind of nice.
That is kind of nice.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those things. I tried to get our Memphis chapter of ACFW to commit to everybody writing a story, and I don't think, well, Tracy probably did.
But one of ours did, and she was published. Was accepted. Is that Renee? I believe it's Renee Dick.
Renee? Oh, yay. Well, good. Good. I was trying to do one. I was going to do one for the cat, and had made wonderful notes and got a good start, and that piece of paper got lost in the move, and it was just like, I just couldn't recapture it. And so that went that. But I think I found it again later, and I put it up so that if they ever do a cat one again, I might pull that out. Yeah. But that would be a great thing for our Writers Chat community to do too, is through 2017, 2018, everybody try to write it and submit one chicken soup story and see how. So that's going to be the challenge that I'm going to put out there, is find one of the titles that appeals to you and get that story written and submit it, and we'll start keeping track of that, because that would be so much fun to see everybody.
And I would love to hear about it too.
Yeah.
And that if you subscribe to The Right Life, then that would make a great subscriber spotlight.
That wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Right. Yes. Don't forget to subscribe to Right Life. Bethany, did you get that information in the chat? The links for it in the chat too?
Yes, I put the URL in.
Okay, great. Thank you. Again, just a great little newsletter, and it is one that you'll want to actually open and read and not just wipe it away. Tracy, thank you so much. This is, as always, has just been so much fun. Great information. Next week, we're going to be joined by Anitra. Oh my gosh, how do you say her last name? Parmalee? Did I say that right?
I say Parmalee, but I might be wrong.
Parmalee, Anitra Parmalee, a delightful person that once you meet her, you never forget her. And she's going to be talking to us about interviews and how to not only conduct interviews and be a good interviewer, but also tips on being a good interviewee, because we need to know that too as you get out there and, you're pitching your books and all this kind of thing. You want to have those skills that make you somebody that people want to ask back on their radio programs or, television programs or whatever it may be. So Anitra will be here next week. I'm really excited about that. She's just a dynamite, phenomenal person. She's been on the radio for many years, so she's got that kind of experience. We have a question from Gail real quick. Can we submit to multiple book topics?
Yes. Yes, you can submit as many stories to each book as you want. Now, I always say, though, submit each story only one time to each title. But you can submit as many as you want to each title, and you can submit. In fact, there have been a few times that they've had two books that were similar that were in the works at the same time. I know one time they had Thank You, Mom and Mothers and Daughters. And so if your story would fit with either one, you could submit it to both titles at the same time. Now, they want to know, and that it's a little long to go into how you do that, but they want to know that you're submitting to each book, and you would have to go through the submission process twice, one for each book. But you can do that. But yes, you submit as many stories as you want. They're fine with that.
That's good information to know.
I'll tell you, I'm going to up the stakes on this. I'm going to give a $5 Starbucks gift card to whoever submits a good. Now, don't just write something. It has to have a good beginning, middle, end, and a takeaway, a wrap up. To the first person that submits a story to one of the Chicken Soup for the Soul.
All right.
Okay, so there you go, guys.
Vicky did.
She said 2 months ago, though.
No, it starts today. But
to everyone who does it, or the
first person who does it. The first person who does a really good bit. Well, this is kind of off camera stuff. I will send Vicky a gift card too, because I owe her for yesterday's mess that I had created with stuff. So that's, we need to edit this whole part out. Never mind.
We're going to leave it in, because if you don't know what they're talking about, it's just going to be a blurb for Serious Writer Academy. Check it out. Oh my gosh. I know we probably should be doing this offline, but Kyle and Vicky and Cody and I were on last night doing some upgrades to the website. It's amazing.
All right.
Well, actually, they were doing it. I was watching. It was amazing.
It's a beautiful website.
It is really
good. They did a great job.
It's good. I ended up going through my course yesterday, and I was impressed with, I was kind of impressed with me too, to be honest, a little bit. But, it just kind of went pretty well after we got the kinks worked out that had been there. But yeah, I mean, it was just so nice the way the whole system just went from one to the other and how it works. It's it's great. So yeah, be ready to for Serious Writer course.
I'm going to go ahead and, since we're talking about Serious Writer Academy, we mentioned that Tracy has a course, and Mom, that Tracy has a course specifically on how to write for Chicken Soup for the Soul that is available. It's live. She is in our pre-launch phase. And I'm going to go ahead and put the URL in here in the chat. So you guys, it'll go directly to her page. You can see her bio. You can go ahead and sign up for her course. And she has more courses that are coming soon. So you can see her list and get on our email sign up, which is on the homepage. So let me go ahead and put that in here. Be sure to go check out Tracy's stuff. She's got some really great classes, and I'm very excited about them.
Good. Well, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to do. It is.
All right. Well, again, thanks to Tracy for being here and for all these great insider tips for everyone in the chat. I'm going to close out those on the replay. We're so glad that you're watching. We always appreciate that you join us, even if you can't be here when we're doing this live. And stop the recording. So for everybody on the replay, see you next week. Everybody that's here, stick around for a little bit longer. Bye-bye.